And welcome back inside Creaking Door Paranormal Radio. I was afraid we wouldn't even find our way back to this studio.
I took a couple wrong turns in the hallways and down the corridors, and I might have stepped into the wrong restroom on the way. I heard some screams, but here we are.
Here we are. It is Tim and Brad back in the studios with you for Creaking Door Paranormal Radio. We do appreciate all of our listeners who have been asking and patiently waiting for a new episode. We kind of went through a transition phase. If you remember back, it's been a while since we've done a show, but at that time we were also transitioning to a new platform.
Yes.
We finally got that set up and running, but then life just got crazy as it does, and
things are still sort of crazy out there with the COVID thing.
Mm-hmm.
And on top of that, the summer was just absolutely bizarre to a point.
Yeah.
Between the Michigan Paranormal Convention, which was a great event again this year. Kudos to everyone that joined us for that back in August. And it's just been so crazy busy, and we're just off the road now.
Yeah, exactly. We're in between weekend visits for speaking at conventions, and so we knew we had to make this work because our upcoming guest is one we did not want to miss out, and we'll talk more about that later, but I am excited.
And let's thank the folks from Midwest Parafest. This last weekend we were down in Toledo, Ohio.
Yes.
Had a great time with some great people, hanging out with John Tenney, Exie Smith.
You bet.
A whole load of paranormal presenters, if you will. So
it was a lot of fun, and always fun when we get together with these people and hang out at these events.
Oh, yes, and got to go out, speak on our new book, Great Lakes Monsters and Mysteries. So that was fun. Great audience, great, well-run event, very well-run event, great people. So
and the location was outstanding, that old haunted building we were in.
Yes, and it happened to have a brewery inside the premises.
Did I forget to mention that?
You might have forgot a lot after that, but it was a great weekend, and we want to thank the folks down at Erie Shore Paranormal that put that event on for having us in this year.
You bet. It was an absolute honor and pleasure to be there, and hopefully we can do it again soon because that was a lot of fun. All right. Well, we even though it's been a while since we've done a show, we haven't forgotten how this works. We know we got to do a little segment we like to call Para News, where Brad and I each kind of find a story or two of some interesting, weird things going on out there that we find fascinating.
Absolutely. And the first one I found is interesting. Some pterodactyl sightings in Oklahoma. We're not going back far. We're just talking in the.
We're not talking Stone Age here.
We are not.
Okay.
And this was interesting because when I mentioned our new book, Great Lakes Monsters and Mysteries. When we were doing the research for that, I actually interviewed a woman in southern Michigan who believes she had a pterodactyl landing in her backyard.
Outstanding.
Not once, but several years in a row.
Wow.
So this was fun to stumble upon. It says, stories swirl about what resides in the thickness of green country, Oklahoma. With tales of strange sightings abundant. Seems it's not just pterodactyls. This is one of those areas that some might consider a portal.
Okay.
If you read into this enough. In a recent interview, reporters read aloud an email from someone claiming to have grown up outside of Tahlequah, I believe I'm saying that right, in the small community of Briggs. The person claimed to have once seen a pterodactyl after picking up a friend in the Pumpkin Hollow area, and asserted another friend once saw a similarly large winged creature in the area. It's not the only story of unusual sightings, but few were ever reported to area officials. Cherokee County Game Warden Cody Youngblood said if locals do have such encounters as flying dinosaurs, river or lake monsters, or even Bigfoot himself, they're keeping it to themselves. Mountain lions and bears are about the only thing that they're calling us with, saying that they've seen them in the area, he said. Tales of unidentified creatures are widespread, though. Each year, the Oklahoma Bigfoot Symposium is held in Stillwell, Oklahoma. There's even a reported $2.1 million bounty for a Bigfoot to be captured alive and unharmed. That seems like it'd be worth going out into the woods for a couple nights for.
But I like the fact that they're saying unharmed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Not these people who say they'll sell license and dead or alive. Yeah. But this one I like.
Yeah, you got to just maybe chloroform them and bring them in. So
drop from the tree behind them.
Boy, I think there's some amateur filming we need to do here.
I think so.
Then there's a freshwater cryptid known as the Oklahoma octopus. I've never heard of this one.
I have not either.
Which people believe inhabits Lake Tenkiller. Whether authentic or for laughs, it appears many of the area have put their own stories in mysterious species and peculiar phenomena. The Dacre Daily Press asked readers on Facebook to share their own strange experiences. Some respondents singled out the creatures that they believed they saw, while others only hinted at seeing something spooky. So there you go, more pterodactyl sightings. Talked a little bit about this weekend, too, in the presentation that we did.
We did. And as a matter of fact, one of the other things we talked about, too, which is another part of your book, of the new book, Brad, is sea monsters.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And, of course, Loch Ness is the big one. Champ is a big one. And here in the Great Lakes, we have our own that are said, each Great Lake is said to inhabit its own.
Pressy and Bessie and Gassie and Ditha. And, yeah, every lake's got something that people cite and can't quite explain away.
Well, now it seems China can be added to that map. The Yangtze River, the longest river in Asia, about 3,900 miles in length, is the third longest in the world. And last weekend, footage appeared on China's popular Sina Weibo microblog of what appeared to be a long black creature maneuvering through the waters, and it has dominated online discussion ever since. Footage has quickly racked up millions of views, and theories are all over the place of what exactly this could be. And of course, you've got those who are saying, yep, this is something unexplained. You got those who are saying, no, it's just a big snake, whatever. But now China can throw its hat into the ring as a possible home of some type of lake monster.
Well, and you look back, and it was one of the fun things researching the new book. I found newspaper reports, written reports from every decade of the 1800s right through the 1900s of sea monsters being sighted in the Great Lakes region. And it's, you look at Loch Ness, that's approximately, I want to say, somewhere in the realm of 22 square miles. If you put that onto the Great Lakes region, you're talking over 4,000 Loch Nesses would fit surface area.
That's fascinating. Yeah.
So there's so much underwater terrain that has never been explored. So you would think in China you've got the same issue.
Yep.
So could something be there?
Well, it sounds like it may have been caught on film.
They seem to think so.
Yes.
This next story is a little bit on the disturbing side. A doctor who injected his partner with drugs during exorcism ceremonies and left her close to death has been sentenced to over 14 years in jail. Hussam Metwali, age 61, made dozens of recordings of himself injecting fluids through a cannula to Kelly Wilson while chanting as part of a dangerous perversion of the Islamic Ruqya ritual of exorcism. The father of four worked as an anesthesiast at the Diana, Princess of Wales Hospital in Grimsby and ran his own pain clinic from home. He's also reportedly to have filmed two other female patients without their knowledge. Metwali was sentenced to 14 and a half years for endangering Miss Wilson's life by administering anesthetic drugs, supply of various controlled drugs or medicines, possession of a controlled drug with intent to supply, fraud, and voyeurism.
Oh, my.
Miss Wilson was found at Metwali's home on the 4th of July, 2019, in a deep coma on the brink of cardiac arrest and with a fluid line inserted in her chest after engaging in an exorcism ritual the previous evening. Sentencing him at the Sheffield Crown Court, Judge Jeremy Richardson said, "You are a disgrace to your profession. You will not be a doctor for very much longer, and I trust you will never, ever be a doctor again."
Yeah, I would think so.
So there, kind of disturbing on several levels.
Yeah, it is. You hate to hear these stories. Every now and then these type of creeps within the field pop up. And the good news is he's been busted.
He has, and he's going to be... He's 61 now, so 75 before he gets out of prison, 75, 76.
If he even does.
If he does, if he makes it.
All right. Well, I'm going to finish up pair of news here. This one is absolutely fascinating and creepy at the same time. We're going to go to the grave with this one. And this has just recently become very popular online. Of course, that whole TikTok thing.
Oh, the tiki-taki.
I'm still just figuring out the tweets, and now they got TikTok thrown at me. But this is absolutely fascinating. California man was given the fright fright of his life after allegedly stumbling upon a century-old grave with human hair sticking out of it. He created the video and shared it through TikTok, and it currently is boasting over 1.5 million views and 290,000 likes. Now, when I first saw it, he said, I was shocked. I wasn't exactly sure what I was seeing was real, said Joel Morrison, as he told the press. Really blanking gross. But upon closer inspection, I realized that it was definitely human hair coming out of the grave, the stunned 37-year-old handyman told the press. Now, when you look at the photo, it actually is quite disturbing. This is old tufts of hair. Now, at first, people are thinking, because this is over 100-year-old tombstone, and this tuft of thick locks is coming out from a crack, and it looks like, some people are saying it was put in there, but come to find out, the professionals are weighing in. They say this can happen. For one, they say the tomb is buried near a tree, and they've found
root system pushes. Okay,
can push them up.
That makes sense.
Also, a lot of waterlog can manipulate the ground and push a coffin up. And also, as critters get in there, once there's holes in there and critters get in there and they start to go in and mess with the stuff and then pulling stuff
back out. Sure.
So they say the doctors and all those checking it out say this is legit. This is a tuft of hair come out here. I'll show you a picture. I know we'll show this on our Facebook page.
That's nasty.
It is nasty, isn't it?
That's nasty.
So it's a real thing, and they found this tuft of hair coming out of a grave, and of course, the whole idea of maybe it's a vampire coming out of the grave at nighttime. Who knows? But interesting, fascinating story.
Speaking of vampires, brings us up to our first guest back.
Yes.
For the new season.
Very, very excited to be welcoming in someone who is, let's just say, in a way related to Dracula.
Absolutely.
We'll leave it at that. So stick around. Our next and first guest in quite a while inside the Creaking Door is coming up next, right here. It's Creaking Door Paranormal Radio, powered by Eagle Play. Our world is filled with hidden mysteries and wonders for those who open themselves up to possibilities that science has not yet explained. Tim Ellis and Brad Blair, two of the authors who brought you Supernatural Haunts, Upper Peninsula Paranormal Research Society case files, and hosts of Creaking Door Paranormal Radio, continue their exploration of the bizarre and otherworldly in their latest book, Great Lakes Monsters and Mysteries. Join Brad and Tim as they recount some of the myriad legends of the lore of the United States Great Lakes region, along with monsters of the deep you'll read of UFOs and alien encounters, shapeshifters, cryptids, both winged and terrestrial, imps, fairies, gnomes, black-eyed kids, haunted lighthouses, and phantom schooners. Tim and Brad also share some of the ghost stories and mysterious happenings shared from their listeners of Creaking Door Paranormal Radio. Get your copy of Great Lakes Monsters and Mysteries today at www.supernaturalhaunts.com. And welcome back inside Creaking Door Paranormal Radio, powered by Eagle Play, as we're still kind of brushing the rust off here, Brad. It's been probably 3 months since we've been back into the studios here for Creaking Door. It feels great to be back in, but sometimes you lose the touch a little.
Well, you keep the touch going. We had such a crazy summer with everything going on in the world, and then with our Michigan Paranormal Convention coming back online this
and then
year.
Our own speaking engagements outside of that. It's just been insane.
It has, but it's great to get back in and get another season of Creaking Door Paranormal Radio out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And we couldn't be more excited to have this next guest. He is a first-time visitor inside the Creaking Door. And to have him as kind of our return show after a few months out of the studio, very excited about this gentleman, Brad. We found him in our research a couple years ago as to who we wanted to bring in for Michigan Paracon, and he was supposed to be with us this year, but just due to flight restrictions and all the travel restrictions with COVID still going on, unfortunately we couldn't have him with us, but we're excited to say that he'll be with us next year.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I know you and I both growing up, we grew up heavy into the Universal monster movies.
Oh, it was huge.
And which really opened the door to literature in a big way for us as kids as far as getting into the old Gothic stories. And I can't think of a better horror story, or my favorite at least, than Dracula.
You bet. It is that iconic, and so is the book that the movie that we're talking about was based off of. And, of course, the author of Sid book is Bram Stoker, and that's why we're very excited to be welcoming inside the creaking door the great-grandnephew of Bram Stoker. Please welcome in Dacre Stoker inside the creaking door. Dacre, thank you for being with us.
Well, Tim and Brad, thank you for having me here. It's a great honor. As I pondered, geez, I just couldn't get up there this year to the Michigan Paracon, but boy, being here with you guys on Creaking Door is the next best thing, and I'll be there next year.
Yes, you will. We've already got you lined up and ready to go. And actually, we always say nothing happens just happenstance. Everything seems to happen for a reason. That overused word synchronicity, right? It gets used everywhere now, but it's the truth. Things kind of line up the way they are, and we were just talking before we went on the air here with you, Dacre, how it's going to line up now with you being with us at Paracon next year and the anniversary that lies within all that is Dracula.
Absolutely. It's incredible when you really think of next year is the 125th anniversary of Bram Stoker publishing Dracula.
Wow.
And it certainly kept me in my toes the last 12 or 13 years of doing research. But there are folks around the world who are just, bowled over by this book. Guys like you who the movie adaptations, the streaming adaptations, the comic books, the figures, this book that Bram wrote 124 years ago now has really changed the world in some interesting ways, not just obviously English Gothic literature, but it's woven its way into the fabric of popular culture in many, many ways, and that's really why I'm involved, is trying to let people realize that this creature that Bram started is kind of overshadowed the creator, Bram Stoker, my great-granduncle. And I want people to know more about him because he's worthy of it. He's a very interesting guy.
Has the book ever in the last 124 years been out of publication? It seems there's so many versions of it out there.
Well, the answer is no. It's never been out of print. It's been translated in over 30 languages. It is a Dracula character has been adapted into over 600 movies. So, once a book goes into public domain, like Dracula did in '62, it's kind of easy not to go out of print because no publisher has to pay the Stoker estate any money to publish it. So that's one thing. The other thing is it's always out there. It's being taught in high schools and colleges. It's almost a must read if you're a horror fan, as Frankenstein is. It gives a glimpse into the era that it was written. It was written in 1897. Scholars knocked themselves over to try to figure out, what was Bram Stoker really talking about? What were his inspirations, his motivations? So at so many levels, guys, this book connects, and it connects in a way that it's still, vibrant and horrifying people to this day.
Yeah, and I think that's what's so powerful of it. You kind of, about that book, Dacre, you kind of just touched on it, is that this is a book that transcends a horror story. It has become part of the lexicon of universities and high schools and becoming must-read for classrooms, too.
Yeah, I've met so many people when I go to conferences, and I go to conferences like your all's and huge ones like Comic Con and Dragon Con. I go to academic conferences as well. I want to absorb it all, but I also feel it's important that I am there kind of holding the Stoker banner to let people know a little bit more about what I know about Bram. But it amazes me how many people have figured out different angles to analyze the book. And these are mostly university students that are writing their master's or their doctoral dissertation. They're looking at all these different levels. And I say, guys, at the end of the day, it's really hard to tell exactly what Bram was talking about, because he didn't leave an autobiography. He did leave 125 pages of notes. He did, which are in the Rosenbach Museum in Philadelphia. He did leave a typescript that the Paul Allen estate purchased, and it is out in Seattle at Paul Allen's estate, and he allows serious scholars to look at it. But there's nothing definitive that says, Bram Stoker says this is why he wrote the story. So much is up to interpretation. And that's, I think, why it stays so relevant, is we're still looking for that answer that somebody may find in a yard sale, stuck behind, some kind of naive painting.
Yep.
It was like, yep, here's the answer, guys. And now we can fold the tent, go home, because we know the answer. And Dacre Stokers go, no, there's still more. Trust me.
Yeah, really. Let's not close a chapter yet.
Let's step back in your life, Dacre. Growing up, was Dracula, was Bram Stoker's legacy a part of everyday conversation in your family, or how exactly did you get involved into the Bram Stoker estate?
It's a good question. So, I'll lay out the groundwork. Bram was one of 7 children. Okay, of those 7, only 3 had offspring. Of course, Bram had a son. That son had a daughter, and that daughter actually was married twice. Both husbands died in World War II, and there were 3 great grandsons. There are still 2 alive. And then Bram's youngest brother, George, got married to Agnes, had 2 kids. The son, Thornley Stoker, came to Canada after World War I, and that's how my branch of the family started. And there was 3 boys from that family. Of that, none are still living, but there are people of my generation, 6 of us. And then the final son, Tom, that had a child, he had a daughter, married a fellow named Farson, and Daniel Farson was the offspring. He's a generation older than I am, and he actually wrote one of the biographies of Bram. So I was aware growing up in Montreal, Canada, purely just around Halloween time, when people would talk about Dracula, they'd talk about, the Stoker family, blah, 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 what's going on? We come to your house and you're going to give us candy or take our blood. That kind of becomes, a kind of a broken record around Halloween. But I didn't really get into it until, the late 70s, when I went off to college and started to, actually study. And I was a physical education and education major, but I took English courses and decided to focus a little bit on who Bram was. But funnily enough, back in the day, there wasn't much written about Bram Stoker. There was a heck of a lot about Dracula. And it wasn't until these 2 Boston College professors, McNally and Florescu, actually wrote a book called In Search of Dracula, and they devoted a portion of that to what they discovered in the Rosenbach Museum, the Dracula notes, and they were the first ones to draw the parallel, based on Bram's notes, between Vlad the Impaler and Count Dracula. And then they kind of rounded out, saying, well, here was Bram, this Irish guy, he was a civil servant, he was a theater manager. That's where the Stoker family got info. We had a copy of that book, and I read that as well as Dracula while in college, and you can say the rest is history. But I really was, and still am, the only one kind of flying the banner to this day, and have gotten into writing prequels and sequels and so on. And I've decided it's important that somebody of my generation within the family learns as much as I can, because if somebody of my generation doesn't, it's going to be hard to catch up and figure out what we're missing. Because you can't trust biographers all the time. They do a pretty good job, but nothing's better than somebody within the family really studying and digging deep into the mysteries and the secrets.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. And so you're absolutely right. It is, it's you're taking the flame now, if you will, and you're keeping it going for generations to come now. But for you, Dacre, once you really started to want to find out who your family member was, who Bram was, and then wanted to kind of allow the family legacy, if you will, at that point to live on and start the writing. Did you, after researching him, try to follow in his footsteps and walk the walks that he did and find out what his motivation was for Dracula before you started to delve in and start writing as well?
That's a good question. I don't think I did it consciously, but I think I did it subconsciously. What I did was realize the more I understood him, this weird childhood illness, his turning into an athlete, and then actually very, a champion athlete at Trinity College. And then I find his lost journal, a journal of his that he had mentioned in a book he wrote, but nobody knew where the journal was. And I was digging around in the attic in the Isle of Wight of my cousins, and I found this box and had this almost illegible, 177 pages of stuff. That's when, upon analyzing that and publishing it with Dr. Elizabeth Miller of Toronto, that's when I really figured out who this guy was, because I was reading this journal and picking up on things that Bram observed, that he felt, that he recognized, things that he wanted to keep for speeches, for stories, for articles. And it was while he was a university student, while he had his first job. And it wasn't too far off the chronological age of myself that he was writing it. So it was kind of like in real time. And as I had been an athlete myself, actually all the way up to the national, international level, and I'd actually coached at the Olympic level, I started to figure out what makes Bram Stoker tick, much like I did to my own athletes, and what he was trying to attain. And obviously, he's trying to become a writer, but also make a living as a theater manager. But he's trying to put people on the edge, and the edge of reality. And it's an area that I know you guys delve into with the paranormal. He was really into spiritualism and wrestling with these concepts of what happens after life. Now remember, this is 1897 when Conan Doyle, who's a good friend of his, was interested in spiritualism, and so was Mark Twain, a neighbor of Bram. So the intelligentsia of the time, these guys that were taking risks, as Bram was, delving into the occult and wanting to know more, even though it was sometimes socially unacceptable to question things. It wasn't cool to be a paranormal investigator back in the day because the church had such a kind of stranglehold on things.
Right.
Yet Bram did it in a way that was kind of clandestine. He wrote this novel and introduced these ideas of the devil, of the supernatural, and he did it in a way that he could say, well, it's fiction. But he veiled it with things in the novel that made it sound real and very real. Remember, the book was written while the Jack the Ripper murders were going on, and many people suspected that was supernatural because nobody, even the police, couldn't catch the guy at the time. Right. So there was a lot of uncertainty, a lot of stress at the time, and Bram capitalized on that with this supernatural thriller. And people weren't quite ready for it at the time, but they certainly have accepted it since then.
Yeah, for sure. And very interesting on how you lay it out on the timeline like that. I think that's going to really kind of paint the picture for some of our viewers who may not have fully understood the timeline that this novel was being written and what was going on in the world around it. So thank you for doing that, because I think that's really going to paint a very clear picture for a lot of our listeners on that. I think that's as important as the writer himself sometimes.
Yeah, you got to put those things in perspective. You say, well, when did Lovecraft write? What was going on at the time? When did Poe write? When did Mary Shelley? Mary Shelley writes Frankenstein when, medicine was, nowhere near the way she sort of predicted it would be. Bram Stoker writes Dracula when international travel is just picking up. The country of Romania wasn't even what it was, but Transylvania was recognized, but it was a land beyond the forest. And that was one of the books that he found. This was this, strange place out in the middle of nowhere. But it was also a time when people in the British Empire were scared to death of what they call reverse colonization. People coming back to England going, you've been out and conquered the world, now we're going to come back to your island and hang here. People were scared of that.
Sure.
And there was plagues and cholera epidemics and things going on, contagious diseases, when people didn't understand germ theory. So they ratcheted up these unexplained deaths, much to the chagrin of organized religion, as to maybe this was supernatural occurrences. Yeah. Maybe the spirits of the dead are coming out of the ground and taking the life from the others. How can you explain that to the local priest? And he can't. And so people's minds who are trying to rationalize the unknown. And so the best way to do it is when somebody comes up with, some good folklore or a superstition to say, well, it's, these are spirits that are not at rest and they're coming out taking the life from the living. We've got to do all these rituals. Bram found 26 books, guys, that confirmed all this sort of stuff in the London Library. So this was mainstream authors, people that have been to Transylvania, that have written guidebooks and tour books and have delved into the superstitions and kind of made it seem real, gave it this justification that it existed. Bram simply took all that cool stuff and wove it into a heck of a cool story.
Yeah. And in your story, in your international bestseller, Dracule, you incorporate parts of Bram's real life and incorporate. I love the way you did that. I really enjoyed the book. And you work it in so that it feels autobiographical, as if it was something that Bram wrote. What really inspired you to mesh the two?
Well, it's just as you said. It's kind of let people, be. They question. I wanted people to question, first of all, is this a real story or not? Is this Bram Stoker fictionally or factually or a little bit of both? But what really kind of put me over the edge was when I analyzed his life and he had this mysterious illness that nobody really knows what caused him to be so sick for 7 years, isolated in his room, only picked up and brought outside, didn't know it was a stand, upright. But then he made some miraculous recovery at the age of 7+ to become a champion athlete. Now, people just don't, in those days, they just don't recover with fancy medicine like steroids and human growth hormone and all this other stuff that help people who are so debilitated to bounce back, but just not bounce back, but to grow to be 6'2" and this big champion stud on campus. So I just, what writers do a lot is like, what if? What if there was some sort of supernatural intervention that Bram recognized beyond his dreams, the nightmares that you don't wake up from, and he really did have some help along the way, and therefore now, near the end of his life, he needs to tell his story. And the story of Dracula just resonated to me like, my God, maybe this is true, and what if it was? There's got to be a backstory to this. So that's what Dracule is. And when J.D. Barker and I got together to create it, I said, well, the first thing we got to have is the truth. And so I presented certain documents in his life, and J.D. said, it's got to be the nanny. And I go, what do you mean? And they really did have Ellen Crone as a nanny. She came to them as an orphan and stayed. He said that's always the unknown. The family members are kind of known entities, but the nanny, you don't know what she brings with her. What baggage comes with her.
The outsider.
And without spoiling it, that's our link to the supernatural.
Mm-hmm. Now, you, Dacre, you, as Brad had mentioned, have the international bestseller, as did Bram. Bram had a bestseller as well, but I think the kind of the interesting part about that is, for his time alive, that wasn't Dracula.
That's a shocker, isn't it?
Yeah.
But again, let's put it back in perspective. The question you guys asked earlier, his job was managing the Lyceum Theater for the most famous Shakespearean actor of the time, Henry Irving, who was actually knighted, the first actor ever knighted for his contributions to the stage. 27 years, Bram did everything within his power to help Irving succeed, to help the theater succeed, and it did. But when he died, I mean, it's kind of like if we, in our age, if we rolled up Brad Pitt and George Clooney into one body and you've got one manager for him and he dies. Bram wrote a 2-volume, not classless expose, but it was basically my personal reminiscence of Henry Irving, where Bram only mentions himself a few times, but he does. But he mentions a lot of the things he and Irving did together, their travels, their meeting of Buffalo Bill, their friendship with Buffalo Bill, who, of course, Bram Stoker helped him come over to Scotland and England to perform his Wild West show. But he was also the guy that Bram Stoker modeled Quincy Morris after. in Dracula.
Yeah,
so
sure.
there's always a connection. Anything I went, there's always a little Dracula connection in all these things that Bram did.
Outstanding. I also found it really interesting, too. I mean, you had kind of touched on this already. The idea of people mysteriously dying. Was it a disease? Was there a plague going on? Bram's eldest brother, who was a doctor, was a medical consultant for the writing of Dracula, if I'm understanding that correctly. Is that right?
Absolutely. He was another doctor knighted for his contributions to medical science. Sir William Thornley Stoker, his eldest brother. In the Dracula notes and also in the Dracula typescript, it's very obvious that there's Thornley Stoker's handwriting, and he actually explains to Thornley how to do the blood transfusions.
Okay.
He also explains this very complex surgery that was performed in Chapter 21 when Van Helsing and Seward actually had to perform brain trephination on Renfield. If you remember, he was knocked around by Dracula and had brain swelling. And at the time, brain trephination surgery was just in its infancy, and I found that Thornley Stoker performed it 3 times in medical journals. Twice it was successful and once it wasn't.
Wow.
But that scene in Dracula, again, it doesn't play out in many of the movies. Renfield is conscious while they take a hole out of his head to let some of the blood pressure come out. It's gruesome, but it's real. That's what's so cool. So Thornley was very helpful, told him what kind of medical instruments to use. And remember, blood transfusions were in their infancy. They didn't even have blood typing at the time. So Thornley helped the brother get it right. And this is the way Bram liked to operate. He wanted things done properly. And the funny thing is, to this day, on British television, they require medical procedures to be accurately done. They don't want people to fudge it. It's a funny thing, and not many people knew this, that TV and movies in England, you got to do everything, by the book, so it's not just like a fudge factor, so people go, oh yeah, we can fix this, no problem, with a Swiss Army knife and a little bit of duct tape. No. So Bram was foreshadowing how things had to be done right to create the illusion that the story was real.
Well, so ahead of his time. I mean, think about it. Go back to his time of writing that book. He could have written any type of medical procedure, and 90% of those who read it back then would have not have questioned it in any way. It's almost like he foresaw this book going generations beyond him, and he could have been questioned about it. So I find it so fascinating that even back then he had a medical consultant in that book.
Yeah. And it was also, Thornley was also an expert in the whole concept of mental diseases, psychological diseases, and I've seen records of Bram Stoker actually going to the prisons and the asylums of the day to interview people who were put in prison because they were mental patients or actually in asylums.
Right.
So that's how he got a really good understanding of our man Renfield.
He did all of this in-depth research to put this book together, this classic that has lived on, as we said, going on 125 years. My understanding, though, is he never actually stepped foot in Romania to research the geography, the castles, the things that he wrote on. Those were all out of literature, correct?
Yeah, and he didn't need to. I mean, it would have been great. Yeah, it would have been nice if he could have gone there. He traveled to America 8 times, all over Europe with the Lyceum Theatre. But the resources, guys, that he had in the London Library, and now that I've actually been there and I've seen all those books, analyzed them to the nth degree, there is travel logs by the German Dacre. Train schedules were accurate, physical descriptions of the area. And probably one of the coolest things that is just happened is a friend of mine, a Dutch-German guy, found in the Dracula notes just a couple of years ago, penciled sketches of the lines of longitude and latitude where Bram Stoker decided to set his fictional castle Dracula. And that was based on one of the 3 maps that were in the books in the London Library. And the fact that those maps and the books referenced in the Carpathian Mountains these volcanic mountains. And back in the day, the Victorians had these weird kind of superstitious ideas that the devil's playground was in these volcanoes. Those were portals to hell. So the concept Bram was looking for was a devil incarnate in his Vlad Dracula. He used Vlad the Impaler as a model, but he needed the devil as his sort of absolute creature to then merge with a real person. And the place where he put the castle was an extinct volcano, and the notes show it exactly as you can see these coordinates. And I actually was there just before this pandemic erupted and was able to, with the permission and cooperation of the Kalamani National Park, put a plaque up on the side of a rock face of the side of this mountain with tons of press. This is a location of Bram Stoker's fictional castle Dracula. Yet another mark on the Dracula Trail in Transylvania.
That's great.
Outstanding.
I had the opportunity to tour Romania a number of years back now, and it struck me as very interesting. It was my first time that far into Europe to see how the further you got outside of the bigger cities, which there aren't too many of, how superstitious that the population still is over there. And to see the evil eye built into the sides of houses and crucifixes actually implanted into the home structure, it's yet on the other side of it, they were just really starting to get their feel, it seemed, on tourism. And some of the villages had these really kitschy Dracula statues and different vampire T-shirts, things along that lines. It seems like they're just now really accepting and incorporating that in as a draw to the nation, yet it has to be one of their biggest tourist attractions as far as something that would draw people. I know I never would have had a lot of interest in Transylvania in Romania had it not been for reading Dracula on multiple occasions and just the extent that he's been infused into pop culture.
Yeah, I mean, some of them are embarrassed by it. Some of them are infuriated by it, but many of them profit by it and think it's pretty cool. You know, they would love to be known for other things, but the world just won't let it happen because the whole Dracula vibe is just too strong, and the interest. I'm not sure if did you get to actually see Bran Castle near Brasov?
Yes, it's quite the tourist destination, as it turned out. We were fighting mobs of school children.
Yeah, so I mean, you get the idea that it's like, it's not overrun. They get now 750,000 people to see a castle that they call Dracula's Castle, even though Vlad the Impaler, there's no record that he actually stayed there. There's records that he would have actually used that as a place a stronghold, because it was right on the border of Wallachia and Transylvania. But I will say this, just for the record for your listeners, all these books that I mentioned in the London Library, there was 2 sketches of Bran Castle in those books.
Wow.
And when I'm convinced, when Bram Stoker sat down to describe the exterior of his fictional castle Dracula that he placed 400 miles to the north in the Kalamani National Park on top of an extinct volcano, that he was looking at one of those 2 sketches, because they are the only sketches of castles in the area. And it's very obvious to me when he describes sitting high on this rock precipice, this castle, that's what he's describing. And furthermore, it's Bram's style to kind of take this, sort of collection of things, almost like a merger of different characteristics of people. He did the same with his castle. The interior of his castle, Dracula, was based on the interior of a castle in Cruden Bay, Scotland, where he spent 11 of his summers, and he wrote Dracula there over 2 of them. And he visited the castle, the inside. And it has an octagonal room exactly the way it's described, with the different doors going in, no windows to the outside, lit by a single lamp in chapter 2. It's exactly that interior. So he took 2 castles, put them together, shoved them up on the top of a mountain 400 miles away, and bingo, we have another mystery of like, well, there's no castle there, but what went into it? Now we know.
Yeah, fascinating. Now, Dacre, in your research, of Bram, is the creation of Dracula and the fact that he took all these almost puzzle pieces and created this fictional castle like you've been explaining to us, but have you found him to be someone who was just an amazing writer and had this amazing imagination, or was he into the paranormal or spiritualism or kind of that kind of thing? Did you find anything that in his history?
I'd say it's a merger of both. I actually use the term from this writer, Sebastian Junger, the perfect storm. I don't know if you remember that book and made it into a good movie with George Clooney.
Yes.
But to me, that's Bram's life. There are certain things in his own life, the mysterious childhood illness, the stories his mother told him about people being misdiagnosed and buried prematurely, and a neighbor getting buried prematurely and having to drag herself out of the grave. But then the research that he went through in the London Library, all coupled with his own personal interest of the occult, of the paranormal, of spiritualism, seance. This was a big thing of the day. And his colleagues, Bram was a Freemason, doesn't mean, he's off somewhere doing weird stuff. But, there was an offshoot of the Order of the Golden Dawn. He never went to the Hellfire Club that I know of, but he was interested in that. And as I said earlier in the show, he was good friends with Arthur Conan Doyle, who was a very noted spiritualist. Conan Doyle gave a lengthy interview to Bram prior to his wedding. Bram and Florence were invited to their wedding. He wrote Bram a very nice letter congratulating him on his writing of Dracula.
Wow.
And also recently, 27 letters have been discovered in a library in England. And I'm not allowed to disclose too much about it because I didn't make the discovery. I've read each one of them, but I don't want to take the thunder from the American PhD student who found them. And what she found was that Bram had a profound interest in the occult before he started writing Dracula.
Wow.
While he was writing Dracula, and even after writing Dracula. So his interest spanned about an 11-year period, at least the letters that we found. Can't say that for his interest, but he wrote Dracula over 7 years. But he was obviously thinking about, what happens to the body after our mortal remains are gone. I know he was very well acquainted with the writings of Walt Whitman. They became good friends, obviously long-distance pen pals. And I know that some of the time spent in Cruden Bay, Scotland, he actually sort of connected with the whole idea of, the Mother Earth being so connected to the sky, the sea, the underworld. Cruden Bay, Scotland has some very interesting rocks about 100 yards offshore at low tide that looked very much to me. And when I've been over there doing my research and talking with the writer named Mike Shepard, who's written about that in his book, When Brave Men Shudder, that it just looks like these granite outcroppings are again, like these volcanoes, portals to hell. And there have been so many ships wreck on there. There are so many souls that are at rest, but not at rest, sort of in tormented souls that are laying off these rocks. I'm just, because Bram wrote 2 other books while he was there and mentioned this stuff. I'm sure Bram was very interested in what happens to the soul, and are they at rest? Are they not at rest? Are they searching for some sort of eternal peace, and what goes on, again, after we shut down?
Well, and I know before we went on air here, Tim had mentioned the 2 books that are in every household seem to be Dracula and the Holy Bible. And that's such a true statement, I think, to a point. Those are always in publication. You're just about anybody that you go into, at least growing up our age, has some type of a copy of Dracula. You said there was some type of connection to Bram's funeral.
There's a pretty cool story, and this is a cool thing to sort of try to wrap up this little connection here, which is neat. And I've had some pushback occasionally from very religious people. Oh, I won't read that Dracula. It's nothing but devil worship. No, it's a horrible book. Oh, the messages in there are terrible. And so at times I've been, delicate about whom I'm seeking to and what do I say. But I will tell you this. Bram Stoker's personal Bible that I found in the Isle of Wight has two chapters, two entries that are underlined, and one of them is resist the power of the devil. Mm-hmm. Okay, and I keep that in my mind. And in 2012 was the 100th anniversary of Bram's death, and we had a service in Dublin, Ireland. It was a big gathering of the family, and lots of fans came because there's some wonderful events just sort of publicizing Bram Stoker in his town of Dublin, which was, UNESCO City of Literature, and it was, trying to help promote Bram to be looked at with his fellow writers like Yeats and Swift and others. And we had a wonderful church service in this Protestant church, the one where Bram was married in. And the priest came to me. I was with my son and another guy who was a big collector of Dracula books. And he had asked us before, would you bring a copy of Dracula with you? And we were perplexed. Why did he want this copy of Dracula? Mm-hmm. And three of us were standing, and I says, I'd like to process with the copy of Dracula. And my son, who was a religious major, England and religious at Swanee College, said, Dad, I don't think that's a good idea. And he says, oh, don't be silly. He says, I've got the Bible with us as well. They're both books about good and evil where good wins out at the end.
Nice.
Wow. So it's nothing like a Protestant minister, an Irishman, to sum it up in one sentence. They're both books about good and evil where good wins out at the end.
I love it.
And so he literally had a fellow carrying the Bible, one carrying Dracula. They processed up the church. They had, the cross and everything else. The organ was playing. My son was elbowing me, thinking there was going to be a bolt of lightning come down. It never came down. and both of these wonderful books were placed on the altar for a wonderful service.
Oh, what a great story!
That's great.
Yeah, it is.
So what does Dacre Stoker have coming up now? Are we looking forward to more books? Are we going to start seeing film adaptations of what you've already put out there? New events? What's happening with you?
Oh boy, yeah, the pandemic has cut down my travel, but it's given me time to write. So here we go. I've got some graphic novels that I've teamed up with the guy Chris McCauley in what we're calling the Stokerverse. We're adapting some of Bram Stoker's short stories.
Oh, nice.
To come out as graphic novels, because we just feel they need some attraction, and graphic is probably the way to go. So we've got The Virgin's Embrace. We've got the story that Bram's mother told him when he was a young boy about her experiencing the cholera epidemic of 1832 that I mentioned about the neighbor being buried prematurely. That's coming out in a graphic novel within 6 or 8 months. The artistry takes a while. We've actually got our hands into a documentary about Bram Stoker's life, basically the things I've been outlining to you guys on your show that we think could be a good documentary on television. Mm-hmm. I'm actually writing a story with a Dr. Leverett Butts, who's a professor at University of North Georgia. We've decided to write the story of Bram Stoker in Cruden Bay, in the shadow of this Slains Castle that I mentioned earlier. What actually went on in his life while he was writing the story, the pulling together of the books, but then fictionalizing it, obviously, much like J.D. Barker and I did with Dracula, so that some really weird stuff happens, as well as the writing. So those are the main projects at the moment. And then, of course, with the 125th coming up, Scar Comics in England is going to actually produce a Dracula comic book in installments, but it's going to have all the stuff in it that was edited out in the publication phase, and also some really cool gems that never made it out of Bram's notes are going to be included in this big comic book.
Okay.
As well as some tours to take people to see some of these cool places. So I thank you for asking. And then, of course, be in Sault Ste. Marie next August to give you guys an update again. What else is happening?
Wonderful.
No, we love it. Dacre, before we let you go, I got to ask, because I get curious with these weird questions. But one, how many copies of Dracula do you own? And two, what is the oldest version you have?
I don't know off the top of my head. I got a bookshelf full of these things. I do look for good deals. I'm trying to collect good first editions of them from around the world.
Yeah.
The oldest I have, and I don't think it gets any older than this, it's an edition that Bram Stoker gave to his mother 3 days before its original publication, and it's inscribed by Bram, "To my dearest mother."
Before it ever went to publication.
Wow.
Yeah, it was 3 days before the May 26th, 1897 publication date. So it's obviously, an advance copy, or, the authors, even in those days, would have got a hardcover copy, and he could, give copies to certain people. And so I've got one of those.
That's awesome.
And I do make it available to conventions, to different museums when they're putting on big exhibits. Of course, it's pretty expensive to travel around with. Normally, I say, sorry, I'm not going to insure it and let it go FedEx. You've got to pay for a ticket for me to carry it in my backpack, which I do. And then I bring it there and I present it to them, and then I come around 6 months later and pick it back up again.
Oh, wow.
Absolutely fascinating. This last 40 minutes has just flown by, Dacre. If you want to learn more about our guest and more about his work, you can find him online at it's spelled D-A-C-R-E, Stoker.com. So it's D-A-C-R-E, Stoker.com. He is the great-grandnephew of Bram Stoker, Dacre Stoker. Thank you so much for joining us inside the Creaking Door. This has been absolutely fascinating.
My pleasure, guys. Just looking forward to meeting you all in future.
You bet. Very soon. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, more on the way from Creaking Door Paranormal Radio, powered by Eagle Play. Think of Michigan's Upper Peninsula as the scary attic sitting there above the rest of the state. I can think of no better guides to take you inside the history and lore than the guys of the Upper Peninsula Paranormal Research Society. Those are the words from writer and lead researcher for the hit TV show Ghost Adventures, Jeff Belanger. For over 20 years, the Upper Peninsula Paranormal Research Society has dedicated their lives to researching the paranormal. And now, some of their favorite cases are brought to life on the pages of their debut book, Supernatural Haunts. Come inside these pages with the team as they share intimately the history of each location and their experiences during their investigation. Learn their techniques and some of the most intense moments they have faced. True stories and true accounts of ghosts await you inside the pages of Supernatural Haunts by the Upper Peninsula Paranormal Research Society. Get your autographed copy today at www.supernaturalhaunts.com. And welcome back inside Creaking Door Paranormal Radio with Tim Ellis and Brad Blair. And Brad, I got to tell you, man, sometimes things just work out the way, in such a cool way. And the fact that we've been out of the studio for a few months and come back and to have Dacre as our first guest back. That was so cool to chat with him.
Wasn't it great?
So cool.
And yeah, I've always been such a vampire fan
and
such a Dracula fan. Mm-hmm. As I mentioned, I did do a Romania trip some years back, and I never would have done that, and I loved it. It was an amazing country to see. There's a lot to do there. But I never would have if it wasn't for that Dracula connection.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So, a lot of fun to have him on. And again, we so look forward to having him here in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan next August for Michigan Paracon.
Yeah.
It was such a bummer when he canceled out because there were two people I had never met in person I was looking forward to. Mm-hmm. He was one of them.
Yep.
And the other one was Bob Gimlin of the Gimlin-Patterson film, and he's no longer traveling. So
yeah, same here. It was definitely a bummer, but the fact that it ties into 125th anniversary now.
It's going to be great.
Yeah, it's outstanding. So, again, thank you to Dacre Stoker for being our guest inside Creaking Door Paranormal Radio. Well, even though it's been a few months since we've done a show, we're glad to be back in the studio right in the midst of our busy time of year. We are on the road like crazy right now.
It is, and we've been on the road. We're heading out this weekend. We've got Michigan UFO Contact in Houghton Lake, Michigan. Week after that, Sage Paracon. That's going to be another virtual one coming out of England.
Yep.
Man, we've got
a part of that again, though.
Absolutely. And we've got some library talks coming up.
Yep.
We have,
we have one coming up in November that we're just waiting for the promoter to officially announce it, but we haven't said anything yet on it.
Yeah, but I believe it is out there now on the webpage. He hasn't put it on social media yet.
Well, then let's announce it.
But it is the Old Mill Parafest.
Yes.
That's coming up in Dundee, Michigan. That's, I believe, the second weekend of November. We have another Potographs event coming up, Potographs for Pooches. That's in March. That's after we get over this hump, get past the holiday season, and kick back in. I already have a couple exciting events that we're in the works with for next year as well.
Yeah, it looks like we could be out towards the West Coast next year with some people who we're speaking with. So we'll see. We're excited. It's a busy time of year, but we love this time of year.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Getting into the Halloween season, getting back into the studio, getting another season going of Creaking Door Paranormal Radio. So it doesn't get any better than this.
It does not. So we are wishing everyone a very happy and safe Halloween season. We will have another show to you before Halloween of 2021 that we promise.
Absolutely.
But sit back and enjoy this episode for sure.
And you can keep up on our events where Tim and I are going to be appearing, as well as the websites where you can get tickets, get all the info on. Just check in on our social media sites, Creaking Door Paranormal Radio, on both Facebook, on Twitter. It's been so hot and heavy lately. The way the schedule's been changing, we update it on a regular basis. So just check in. We'll be posting on that as things progress.
Yeah, unfortunately, that pandemic is still out there, and it's throwing a lot of curveballs at events. So, yeah, we got to be fluid with it and changing as we go. All right, that is going to come to a conclusion of our first episode back to Creaking Door Paranormal Radio. So happy to be back in the studios and doing this. And on behalf of my co-host, Brad Blair, my name's Tim Ellis, and thank you to our editors and our producers as we are bringing you Creaking Door Paranormal Radio, powered by Eagle Play.
The Creaking Door.